Information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Now, Property Monday continues as Margaret Lomas and her team answer all on Your Money, Your Call.
Hello and welcome to a fabulous week in property. I'm Margaret Lomas and I'm looking forward to the show this evening, and I hope that you are too. This week, as we always do, we'll answer your questions, bring you the latest news and information about property investing, and of course discuss a couple of relevant investing topics. Here to help me tonight, I've asked into the studio Damian Collins from Momentum Wealth and Steve Waters from the Right Property Group. And tonight we're focusing on how to make simple improvements to add value to your property and also what to look for in a property bargain. We'd like to hear from you, of course, and so you're invited to contact us at any time during the show with your comments, questions, or to just get some guidance. So get to the phones right now and call us on 1300 30 34 35. Tweet me at Margaret Lomas AU or email me now at property@skynews.com.au. Welcome to the program tonight, and welcome to you both.
Pleasure, Margaret. Pleasure, thank you.
Damien, we're going to start with you. What sorts of things should someone look for when they're trying to get a bargain property?
Well, one of the, I guess, the biggest concerns I have, Margaret, with the word bargain is that people often chase sometimes dud properties and they think, well, I've saved an extra 20 or 30 grand, I've got myself a bargain, I should be happy. But in the long run, you'll find that that discount, if it's an underperforming property, will easily be outweighed by the loss of capital growth. So,
yeah, look, I guess people really get confused, don't they? Because they think if they can get a cheap property, they go for price and then they ignore some of the really important fundamentals, don't they?
And it's, I guess it's human nature. They get, oh, I got a deal, I got a bargain. But you know, if it's something you're going to utilise and consume, it's a different story. But from an investment point of view, it's got to be something that's going to be long term.
Okay, so what are the things then that we're looking for?
So really three key things that we look for is it's got to be near infrastructure that's coming that's going to make the area more popular, more accessible, more desirable. That's ultimately what you're looking for. So has it got trains, roads, cafes, schools, whatever appeals. In some areas, cafes might be very important, other areas less so. It just depends on what drives people to that area. The other thing you want to be looking for is also, very importantly, is limited supply. Often see people buy properties in areas that's got good infrastructure, but if there's lots of extra supply that can come onto the market, well, that developers will bring it eventually. That'll hold back some of the price growth. So they're two really important things. And I guess the other thing I look for is an area that's underrated. That's where you're going to get that outperformance. So the bargain might be relative to another suburb that's maybe a couple of suburbs away, but the market, for whatever reason, hasn't re-rated it. And we always see that ripple effect. When an area starts to become popular, people get outpriced and they'll start to move in surrounding areas. So try and buy into a suburb or an area before it's re-rated in the market. That's how you get your bargain.
Damien, I often find that people mistake what makes a good buy. So they look for, very often, the wrong things. Often they might be looking for the kinds of features in property that they'd want in a house to live in. Yeah. Or they might think, if I can buy right on the beach, then people get this mistaken impression that a beachfront property is always going to do really well. Yeah. So what are some of the common misconceptions about what makes property grow well?
Well, you mentioned that exactly right. So a beach suburb or beachfront property sounds good in theory, but if the market's already priced that in and they know that it's a fantastic location, and as you've seen over longer periods of time, some of the blue chip suburbs have actually, what we consider blue chip, have underperformed.
Yeah,
well.
they do.
So
iconic locations, first to go bad in a downturn.
Exactly. So you don't want to be focusing on the things that everyone knows are popular. You've got to think about it very unemotional, and it's very hard because most people buy on emotion and justify with logic. That's, again, human nature. So they've really got to try and put as much logic into it as possible. Talk to your local agents. Obviously, I'd always recommend use a good buyer's agent, of course. course, but you know,
Do you know any?
I know a couple on the panel, but understanding what is driving demand in that area. So in some areas it might be the school, it might be near the amenities to cafes. There's a whole. It's going to be different suburb by suburb. So find out what really attracts people to that area.
And Steve, just quickly, it's not going to be, you know, the beautiful fixtures and fittings and the fabulously highly polished floor and those kinds of things that actually get more money for a property but don't really add value.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to be able to establish, you know, any of the works that you do, is it there to add value, is it there to add cash flow? Because how you take on those renovations will be, you know, a determining factor. So for us, if we don't want to spend a whole heap of money but yet get value for our dollar in terms of added value and not so much cash flow, we're going to be looking at things like, I'm a big fan of curb appeal. You know, from the very get-go, your potential valuer, your potential tenant or your potential buyer is going to have you know, an image imprinted into their mind. Front door, that's another one. And of course, I like little things like door handles, grout, cleanliness, paint, all that sort of stuff.
Okay, I want to come back to that in a moment because I really want to explore that a bit further later on. But let's go to the phones and Ben from Brisbane. Welcome to the program, Ben.
Hi, Margaret.
How are you going?
Good, thank you. Just a question I've got. Look, I've got an investment property and I might be in a position to pay it off shortly, but I'm just wondering from the bank's point of view, would I be better off paying off the current one and then draw against it for another one, or just sort of rent, you know, invest both out?
Okay, so let me just get this right. You've got an investment property and you're wondering if you should pay it off, draw back on the on it to buy another one?
Yes.
And where does your own home fit into this picture?
Well, I'm currently renting.
So you're renting at the moment?
Yes.
Okay. What do you think, Damien?
Ben, that's a very good point. If you're renting, I would certainly not be putting any of my investment property, as long as you're a diligent saver, I'd be pulling it all into an offset account, because if you pay off that investment loan, once you redraw on that again to buy your own principal residence, that will become non-deductible debt. So please put it all into an offset account. Again, you need to be disciplined so you don't spend that money. And that'll then get you a deposit, and hopefully one day you'll be able to buy your own home. And it's obviously in a great position. You've got an investment property with very little debt, so that's fantastic. But yeah, definitely put that money into an offset account. And if you're looking to buy another investment, then I'd be looking at, yes, borrowing against the equity that you currently have.
And would you concur with that, Steve?
Absolutely, 100%. And furthermore, I think you've hit the nail on the head. You've got to be very, very studious and very diligent in what you do with that money, otherwise it'll just go.
Yeah, look, it's a difficult one when you're renting, and I certainly agree that renting can be a good idea if you are investing in property. But if you are deciding that at some time in the future you may want to buy your own home, then only put as much money as you need to in that loan, and then from there you can draw back on the equity. Of course, if the investment property isn't growing very well and you want to be able to invest again, unfortunately you do have to use your cash in that investment, and either paying it off, the investment property, and drawing it back, or using it as a deposit on the next one, the net effect is still the same. I always encourage all of our clients to think about all property as one value and all debt as one lot of debt, except for the family home, which is a separate debt, and then think of it that way as to where your money should go. If you're planning to rent forever, and some people are very happy doing that, then it might be okay for you to start pouring all of your money into that debt reduction. Maybe even down the track you might end up selling a property in order to extract the money to put into your own home, and that's also a plan that I've seen many people undertake as well. Most importantly, find a good qualified property investment advisor and get some advice that's specific to your individual circumstances, because everybody's different and everybody has different period of time till they retire. They have different needs for now, they have different cash flows, so there's a lot of things that are different. That's just some very general advice for you. Damien, just going back to what you said about blue chip properties, you know, people have talked about blue chip for a long time, and I think it's really important to point out to the investors who watch this show really that I think blue chip is really a word that should be reserved for your owner-occupied property.
Yeah.
You know, we want to all live in a blue chip suburb, don't we? Because it means that it's probably already grown very well. It's probably got, you know, a good neighbourhood and some schools and the infrastructure. But as far as I'm concerned, once a property is called blue chip, I think usually its best period of growth is probably already behind
Been
it.
gone.
It'll still grow, but its best period is behind it.
Yeah.
You want a pre-blue chip suburb.
Well, that's exactly right, and that's the ones that we target. Is not the blue chip areas because everyone knows they're popular. You're not discovering any undervaluation or re-rating because everyone knows they're popular. So what we look for is areas that might be considered middle or lower middle socioeconomically, but they've got all the right infrastructure and demographics, and things are happening in that area that are going to mean more middle class people and ultimately middle to lower upper class level, I guess, in terms of income, are going to want to move in that area. They'll pay more for your property, and it's just that small outperformance each year, just that 1 or 2% that over 10, 20 years is where you really make your money in property.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I think it is important that everybody does realise the differences between what you're looking for in a property to invest in and what you're looking for in a property to live in, because they are two very different things. Let's go back to the phones of Matthew from Sydney. You've got a question for us, Matthew, about buying an apartment.
Yeah, thanks panel for taking the question. Look, I just wanted the panel's views on Parramatta, the Sydney suburb of Parramatta. Looking at 2-bedroom apartments, probably over a 10-year horizon. Just wanted your views on the growth prospects there. A little concerned about potential oversupply, maybe.
Okay, Steve, I guess, you know, Parramatta's had a pretty good run.
It's had an excellent
Does
run.
have a fair amount of supply coming online. What do you think about Parramatta now?
Look, I still think it's got growth. I think it's got legs. I'd be very, very particular in terms of what type of unit that you did invest in Parramatta. I'd be going for one of the older established blocks, preferably with a good cost to operate, so a low body corporate, something that's structurally sound. Probably steer away from the newer types of apartments that are going to have high body corporates with elevators, lifts, pools and what have you. I still think the growth is there, be it all that I don't think it's going to break any records over the next couple of years, but from a longevity point of view, I rate it.
And let's point out to the viewers, though, Steve, that when we talk about looking for a low body corporate, we don't want it so low that the body corporate's unhealthy.
Absolutely.
It is important that people realise that money that you would otherwise spend on your own home for upgrades and future renovations and future repairs is really all you're saving toward in a body corporate. And I've seen plenty of buildings where the body corporate fees are too low, and when they buy into it, then all manner of things go wrong and special levies have to be raised.
Yeah, absolutely, and we urge all of our clients to actually become part of the body corporate committee or the owners committee. Take a vested interest into the property yourself because you are paying for it, and to always remember that the body corporate fees are actually split into two different funds, the admin fund and the sinking fund. And I like to personally think of it with my properties, the sinking fund or the body corporate fees is just this kitty that I keep contributing to that's going to take care of all the external maintenance and repairs, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Damien, if not Parramatta, then is there a better option right now?
Matthew, look, if you're braver, you'd actually look outside of Sydney. I think Sydney's obviously done fantastically well over the last couple of years, and as most people do like to invest in their own hometown. Again, I don't know if you are from Sydney, but you might want to have a look at Brisbane if I was you. I think areas like Chermside and Nunda, again, these areas we like that are already starting to be re-rated a little bit, but certainly we think have better upside. I don't think anywhere in Australia you're going to get rich next year. I certainly don't think, but I think you're going to see more upside in Brisbane. My only concerns with Parramatta, yes, great, effectively the second city outside of the central Sydney CBD, but you will have, and you already are starting to see, that a lot of higher density, and so, yeah, be careful. I wouldn't buy one of the newer ones, and even the older ones, make sure it's a well-maintained boutique complex that's going to be in good demand, because there is a bit of a risk of supply there.
Absolutely. Well, it's good to have you on board for the show tonight. If you have a question or a comment and you also want to be in the running to win a copy of one of my books, then get to the phones, the email, or even to Twitter with your question. At the end of the show, one question scores a copy of my book, Investing in the Right Property Now, which is a great book about growth drivers. Call us on 1300 30 34 35, tweet me at Margaret Lomas AU, or email property@skynews.com.au with the question. Make sure you watch at the end of the show to see if we choose your question. Well, it is time now for us to take a short break. Don't go away, though. When we come back, we'll take some more calls and answer some emails. always a pleasure to have your company on the show tonight. Damian Collins from Momentum Wealth is with us, along with Steve Waters from Right Property Group, and they're standing by to take your calls, so don't waste any time. Call us now on 1300 30 34 35. Tweet me at Margaret Lomas AU, or you can email us on property@skynews.com.au. Now, Steve, just before we go to the phones, we talked briefly about some of the things that you can do to add value to a property for not much money. I mean, we know that adding a room is going to add value, but what sorts of things can you do to add some value?
Like we briefly mentioned, curb appeal is a big one for me. It doesn't take a lot of money to, say, lay turf, clean out the clutter. Front doors, very, very important to me as well. You have good front doors, only a couple of $100 plus some labour to hang. And then as you walk inside, just cleanliness. So painting is not expensive, especially if you do it yourself, or pour in some sweat equity, as we call it. And little things such as your door handles, your shower handles, and things like that.
They can easily be changed, can't they? It's quite easy.
Well, you don't have to be a professional to do it. And although it's something that's not highly recognised, if you were to walk into the property, it pulls it all together, I believe. And more so, especially if you paint, it'll only highlight what you haven't done, more so than anything.
Yeah, my son moved into a new property on the weekend, an old property. It had red carpet and it had sort of yellowing walls. And the kitchen, the basics was all right. It had like black Formica bench tops and white cupboards, but they had these big plastic black handles on them. So we just took those off and put some nice little chromies on there. And straight away, everyone walked in and went, "What have you done to the kitchen, Margaret?" And I went, "I just changed the door handles." And it was actually enough to make a big, and hung a blind in the window. It was amazing the difference that it made. So.
And you don't have to spend a lot of money, essentially, especially if you're on a budget.
What are some of the things then that people spend money on that don't really add much value then?
You briefly mentioned it. I'm a firm believer if you add another bedroom, you shouldn't be taking away from any of the other living space within the house. A lot of people tend to add that, say, that fourth bedroom, they turn the dining room or the living area into the fourth bedroom, and it actually devalues the house, takes away the cash flow of the rent, because people can see straight through that. One of the other things I think where people perhaps go a little bit overboard is on the soft furnishing. So, the quality of the carpet, be it all that it has to be decent, you don't have to spend tens of thousands of dollars. Same with the kitchens and the bathrooms. You can get away quite effectively.
Oh gosh, Masters and Bunnings these days, they have fabulous things. You can do a kitchen for $5,000 plus a bit of labour to get it in these days. So.
And then you might get some cheap kitchens out of Masters very soon.
Fire sale.
Okay, good-o. Maybe I shouldn't have mentioned that. Let's go to the phones. And David from Sydney, how are you going, David?
Oh, hi, Margaret. Thanks for taking my call.
You've got a question about tennis courts. I think we've never had that question before.
Yeah, I've got a tennis court in the backyard, and whilst we're not really tennis players, when we bought the house, it was just appealed as a fantastic area for kids entertaining, and it has proved to be so. But now, as we potentially contemplate selling the property, just wondering whether it's a plus or a minus. Does it reduce the buyer pool to a too specific a group, and so on? Just be interested in the panel's view.
Well, what a great question.
I've never heard.
I'm trying to think about me, and I think I probably wouldn't buy a property if it had a tennis court. Because I think I'd be thinking, okay, I'm not going to play tennis on it. And I guess it depends too on whether it's reduced outdoor area, Like if it's 2 acres and it's got a tennis court, then sweet, let's take the tennis court and turn it into a basketball court. But
I guess, David, also it would depend on the maintenance on it. As we all know, pools are very high maintenance and take a lot of work, and if it's a lawn one, I'm guessing that'd be certainly high maintenance. If it's concrete or onto car, clay might be less maintenance. But look, I guess would you put a tennis court in a property? Generally, if you didn't have one there, you'd say no. I couldn't think that would increase the value significantly relative to the cost. As you say, it's a unique product. Even lots of people who do play tennis probably don't want the hassle and taking up all that room and the maintenance, and they're happy to go and play at their local tennis club, of which there's lots in Australia. So, but now you've got it in, would you take it out? Probably not, unless it was really significantly impacting your outdoor living area. Otherwise, it's not worth the expense of ripping out. You might get that person who thinks it's great, and if it's not taking up too much of your outdoor living area, it may not impact other people who are looking at buying it.
I think that's the key, isn't it, Steve? I had a friend who had a tennis court once, but all she had was a tennis court, no backyard. And I can remember thinking, thinking every time you have a function, you've all got to have it on the tennis court. And just how much can you decorate a tennis court to make it look nice?
I think, you're hard up, but I agree. I think if it's concrete surface, it's going to cost you a fortune to get rid of. I'd be inclined to just perhaps pretty it up to the best of your ability.
Can't you just build a rockery over it? If it's a concrete surface, take it down the fence and build a rockery.
Put a granny
Some
float on it.
waterfalls. Put a granny float on it. Now, there's an idea, David. Put a granny float on it. Look, I think the consensus is that, and it depends, I think, too, David, on where you live and, you know, what the clientele who are going to be buying your property. But I think the consensus is that it probably wouldn't increase the value. It may not decrease it either. And if it's easy enough to turn it over into a garden, then we probably would do that. But if it's going to cost you an arm and a leg to do that, I don't think you'll get the money back in increased value on the property by changing it over. Well, in our first email tonight, Damian has a question about his loan, and he asks, "Hi Margaret, we're in our early 30s with a combined income after tax of just under $100,000. Our principal place of residence, house and investment property have equity of $550,000. We're thinking of a family and heading down to a single income of $50,000 for 1 or more years. We'd like to know if refinancing and buying another entry-level property, possibly north or south of Brisbane, is a good idea before we drop income. We could always sell the Melbourne investment property to reduce our principal place of residence to near zero if there's a cash flow shortage. I have friends that are stuck with children. I don't think he means stuck with children. They're stuck with children and can't seem to get more loans for large investments like property with modest incomes like ours." Can be a problem, Steve, can't it? Borrowing when you're down to one income.
Yeah, I think a little bit of forethought will go a long way. If you were to see, you mentioned selling the property, I'm not so sure about that either, because there's obviously the capital gains and other tax implications, and what you end up with may not be what you thought to begin with. What I do like, though, however, is that you've mentioned a couple of good areas being north and south of Brisbane and entry level. Whether you would perhaps take the equity out now and do that, that's a tough call, not knowing your financial circumstances, having a first child to the mix. It's a big step, and I'm not quite sure if I'd take that risk at this stage.
Yeah, it is a risk, isn't it? And that's really what we've got to be. You'd think about safety first, I think, Damian.
Yeah, Damien, I guess the issue is going to be if you're down to 50,000, you're more than likely, I imagine, going to be servicing the existing loans, including a new property, out of your capital. And now that becomes risky, especially when we're in an environment where we don't expect substantial capital growth rates in the next couple of years, generally across the board within Australia. So. Look, we don't know about when your partner's likely to go back to work. If that happens in maybe 12, 18 months or 2 years, that you might be able to wear that, and your partner gets back into a working circumstance. If they're not planning to work, for 5 to 7 years, and you can have a number of children, well, on $50,000, yeah, that seems a bit risky to me. Ultimately, it's your call. You've got to take into account the risk and the fact that you might be capitalising interest. That is definitely a risky strategy. But yes, whether the children are great, but from a servicing point of view, they're a big liability. So if you are down at one income with having kids, you're probably going to struggle to borrow again in the near term.
Yeah, look, it's some good advice from the panel there for you. The thing that worries me the most is that even though you say you can always sell the Melbourne investment property if you do get into trouble, property isn't overly liquid, and you certainly wouldn't want to be up against it at a time where suddenly the market's turned, it's gone quiet, you can't sell that property, you've got to take a loss on it, or you get out of it for a lot less than you want to because you've been forced to do so. I never like people to overcommit, and I think you've got 2 properties on 100,000 already, and sure, you can probably afford that third, but unless it's really going to look after itself and be very positive cash flow, in which case make sure that it is in a growth area, and certainly you can get some good positive cash flow properties in South Brisbane, so you might be able to do that. Just be very, very aware of the risks on the way in and have a backup plan. Ask yourself, what would happen if everything went horribly wrong? Could we afford to live on that 50,000 if we couldn't get rid of the other investment property? And do your cash flows and budgets before you make that decision. Well, it is time for us to pop off for just a quick break, but we will be back soon. Now, if you have a question for us, call to join the queue on 1330 3435, tweet me to Margaret Lomas AU, or email us on property@skynews.com.au. You never know, you could win the question of the week. We'll be right back. Thanks for tuning in tonight for our property edition of Your Money, Your Call. I'm Margaret Lomas from Destiny, and tonight Damian Collins from Momentum Wealth and Steve Waters from Right Property Group are here, and they're ready to take your calls. So call us right now on 1300 30 34 35, tweet Margaret Lomas AU, or you can email us on property@skynews.com.au. Now, just before we go to the callers, the Property Council of Australia has issued a parliamentary committee submission to highlight the potential political consequences of changing negative gearing policy. In a blunt message to both parties in an election year, they say that 430,000 people living in marginal electorates would be impacted by changes to negative gearing. The Property Council warned a parliamentary committee into tax deductibility that changing the policy would be playing with the financial futures of people who live in the most marginal seats. According to the Property Council, new data has revealed that over 430,000 Australians who negatively gear an investment property do live in those marginal seats held by the government and the opposition. Now, I heard a headline this morning, or I think it was on TV this morning, and the headline was, the government is preparing to scrap negative gearing. Now, is that scaremongering, and is that an overstatement of the facts or not? You know, there's no decision made. Someone mentioned it again. There would have to be legislation passed through Parliament.
Yeah.
Both sides would have to agree. I think the government knows what havoc it would cause, but all of a sudden I can imagine investors out there now are all panicking, and they'll all be saying to each other, they're scrapping negative gearing.
Yeah. Look, it goes around in circles. GST is on the table, and it's off the table now, apparently, and they're looking for money. Obviously, they've got a big budget deficit, but as you saw from those stats from the Property Council, in some of those, I read that over the weekend, in some of those marginal seats, there's 8,000 negatively geared investors on a margin of 800 seats. You've got to be a pretty brave marginal seat holder to support the government and agree to that policy. Look, I think the talk is, from what I read and heard today as well, that they might cap it at maximum number of properties, potentially 3 or something.
Hope not.
Oh, I hope not too. I hope not too. Well, the other thing that possibly makes more sense is the big argument, I guess, is when you sell, you get the capital gains discount, but you got the deductions at your marginal rate. But maybe when you sell, some of it's back at your marginal rate, and some capital. That makes a bit more sense, I think. Yeah. But just stopping it is going to ultimately, it'll put rents up. End of the day, that's what it is, and it'll hurt the people who can least afford it. So crazy stuff. And look, it's just all going. But one thing we can be certain of: if you own a property today, they will not make a retrospective. Both parties have said that, so you'll be right if you already own property.
So you should run out now and buy as many as you can possibly afford and get them into your portfolio, because it'll take a year to a year and a half for that kind of thing to get through legislation. Steve, in my investing lifetime, it's the 3rd time this has been on the table, the 3rd time. And that doesn't include the time that they actually went ahead and did it and then had to retract it 18 months later. Yeah,
look, it just goes round and round, I think, at the end of the day. And as blasé as this may sound, it'll be what it'll be, and there'll be an opportunity there for the savvy investor if it was to actually progress to that level. But there'll also be some massive hurt as well, as if, you know, for the potential investor, the developer, whatever it may be. If I was a betting man, will it happen? Not in its full sense, I don't think it will. Yeah, no, I don't think so either. And I think, you know, even the cap, I don't think is going to work, because there are a lot of average income earners who have 5 and 6 properties. Absolutely,
and I just don't think that it's possible for them to.
And the flow-on effect throughout the whole economy, especially today's.
Crazy stuff. Okay, well, let's go to the phones. And Ang, how you going?
Hey guys, how you going?
Good. What can we do for you?
Victoria. So, budget of $750. Looking at buying, just from an investment perspective, either a house in Preston Reservoir area, or an apartment in a city, St Kilda, Armidale, Elwood. Considering growth in units the last year have been 5.3, I think, and houses 13%. Just wanted your opinion on what the better option was for $750 budget.
Well, I'm not a betting woman, but I think I know what you're both going to say. I'm going to start with you, Steve.
Steer away from inner city is probably the first thing I'd suggest. And if you've got a 750 budget, I'd be potentially breaking that up into perhaps two different properties with higher cash flow, something with a little bit better growth potential than the inner cities, which are going to become oversupplied if they're not already.
Yeah. Preston Reservoir, it is a lovely place to live. It's really up and coming as well.
Yeah.
But do you think that's the kind of area that makes a good investment?
And I concur with Steve. I certainly wouldn't be buying apartments in St Kilda and those other areas you mentioned, so keep away from that. In terms of Preston and Reservoir, I think they're good areas, but they have had a bit of a re-rating, and they're certainly not blue chip as we said before. But you might want to look maybe out into towards Frankston and maybe come a bit further in from that area. That freeway has certainly made that area very accessible, the bypass. But again, 750 is a lot. Look, it's difficult in Melbourne now to get much even for half of that. If you're you're going to be up a long way out. But maybe look at splitting it up potentially into maybe a city property and maybe something a bit more regional, because 750 is a lot. But certainly, yeah, keep clear from those apartments. Yeah.
Look, I've done a bit of research into the Melbourne market recently to try to work out where the best buys are, and in fact, we're not seeing it in the inner ring. It's definitely not apartments. We know that the apartments are headed for trouble because they just keep approving more of them, and there's literally hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, coming online in the next 3 to 4 years with the new approvals. So I would definitely, that's going to impact on any of those apartment markets. I'd definitely stay away from those. In terms of the middle ring, I'm not even picking those because at the moment I think they're under interest right now. And they've actually done very well. As you've quoted, 13%, most of that has been in that middle ring. If you go into the outer ring where we see just the edge of the outer ring, where we see blue-collar workers and lots of employment, I'm talking around Deer Park, Tarneit, even Sunshine West, on the west side, and on the east side, Carrum Downs and the areas that ring around Patterson Lakes. It's quite a paradox where you see Patterson Lakes with prices around the 600,000 and 700,000, and right next door in Carrum Downs you can buy in for 300,000, and we will see that ripple effect happen there. We won't have Carrum Downs go to 700,000, but we will see it pulled up by those surrounding suburbs. I think there are better areas to look at than those ones that you're looking at the moment. If it is for living in, it is a different situation, remember. But for investment, I think you need to do a little bit more research on where to buy and a bit more research on those growth drivers. Pauline, you're also from Melbourne. How are you going, Pauline?
Yeah, good, thanks, Margaret. How are you?
Very well. What can we do for you?
Well, my question is about managing investment debt. Myself and my husband, we're in our early 50s and we have 6 properties and our PPR. We've got about 20,000 left on the PPR, and I was looking at just from now on drip feeding that and turning my attention to the investment debt. Now, that debt we have an offset account against.
Yep.
And my question is there any difference in putting our money into the offset account or paying down the actual investment loans? Because if we pay the loans down, we have less interest to claim a deduction on. So is there any difference?
Okay, so of course no difference in terms of less interest, because in an offset you've got less interest to claim a deduction on anyway. Same nil-sum game. Yep. What do you think she should do?
Pauline, I always think, again, you need to be able to manage the debt, and it sounds like you can. You've got 6 investment properties and very little personal debt on your home, so you probably are someone who's astute with their money. But the thing is if you pay down the investment debt, you ever decide you want to take a trip overseas, $20,000 or $30,000, you don't have the cash, and you draw that against that investment property, it suddenly becomes non-deductible and could potentially permanently tarnish that loan while it's in that state. So I would always recommend putting money against in offset accounts. So now some people have this, because you are saving, you're only paying the interest on the net. So let's just a simple example, you've got $500,000 investment loan, $100,000 an offset account. It's exactly the same as paying it off from the cost of interest. You are paying the same amount of interest over the long term. So I'd always recommend putting in an offset account. Once you know never ever again am I going to need that money, I'm done and dusted, then maybe pay it off. But until that time, I'd keep it in an offset account just in case you might want it or need it for something that's non-deductible.
Yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? Because if you need that money, you can't drag it back out. If you drag it back out of an investment debt, a lot of people don't realise that the tax office sees that then not as investment debt anymore. They see that as personal debt the minute you pull it out.
I think having the liquidity is ever so important, especially at that time of your life. I mean, you obviously can handle debt and you can manage it well enough having a portfolio of the size that you do, but having that liquidity about you is ever so important at this stage.
You know, Pauline, the only time that I ever recommend that somebody pay off debt instead of either holding an offset or even having potentially a line of credit where you can split off little bits that you earmark for personal and for investment debt. The only time I ever recommend that people don't do that is when they can't trust themselves and they're not good at managing money. Some people, when they have an offset account, see that money as available for them to spend, and they'll spend it on things that maybe they could go without. If you are disciplined, keep it in offset. If you're not disciplined, get it paid off the loan and make sure you can't get it back out of that loan as extra repayment redraw. So it's really going to be up to you. The net effect is no different either way. So you're going to have the same net effect, except for the fact that if you paid off investment debt and later need it for a personal need, it'll become personal debt and then you'll be a little bit upside down financially. So make sure that you are very disciplined before you go ahead. Now, many property investors think about becoming developers at some stage, and Lindsay's been thinking about that, so he wrote to us and he said, we have 5 investment properties and we feel that we'd like to extend our portfolio faster by getting into property development. Would you recommend property development or is it too high a risk? Steve.
It's a really good question, and I think I get asked that at least once a week. Developers make money because they do it all the time, essentially, and they've land banked the land originally. I'm not in favour of people buying a DA-approved block of dirt and then becoming a developer. I think the risk is too high. If you really wanted to fast-track the portfolio, then probably buy better, look to perhaps buy a block of units and strata subdivide, something with a little bit more risk, and leave the development to those that do it all the time. I'm just not a fan of it. I think the risk is too high.
What do you think, Damian?
Lindsay, I agree with Steve. Look, I mean, I've developed and expanded my portfolio, but I'm obviously a professional in property and I know what I'm doing now. A lot of people, particularly when the market's been running strongly, they get all excited, hear about these stories of developers who've bought something for $1 million and flicked it 18 months for $2 million, or they've made a huge amount of profit on a development. But what you don't hear is on the other side of the boom, when the market comes off, a lot of developers go bankrupt. So if you're looking to develop to sell, it's very high risk. You've got to time the market correctly, and it could ruin all your plans you're putting together so far. And it's a profession in itself. Developers are professionals. It's a business. It's not a hobby, and a lot of people who go into it in a hobby format end up burning money. What you might want to do is maybe buy a site that at longer term has a bit of development potential, that maybe you might develop into 2, 3, 4 units yourself, that might give you a bit development profit at that stage, but you're holding on to them for long-term investment. That's probably the better way for you, most passive investors, to speed up their portfolio a little bit more quickly by doing a small-scale development to hold on to for rental purposes.
Now, be honest, even you, as a professional, I bet you've blown the budget a few times in your developments.
Oh, absolutely.
You always do, don't you? Just always do.
Yeah. Builders go broke, many things can go wrong, and you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, but it's a profession. If you know what you're doing, you can certainly make some good money, but it's not for the hobbyist to go in, and that's a lot of people who get burnt that way.
Yeah, they absolutely do. Let me tell you, by the time that you pay all of your council levies, all of your contributions, all of your subdivision costs, all of your driveways and earth removal and demolition and fence removal and putting in power and putting in water and all of the things that you have to do, and I've only mentioned probably a tiny number of the things you've got to do before you can even get out of the ground, and all of that time you'll be borrowing to do that and paying the interest on the loan with no income coming in. A lot of people fail to add on to the cost the interest for the year to year and a half, and it's going to be a year to year and a half that you are drawing on loan funds and you're not making any money on it. So that adds to the cost of that development, and it means that it's very, very difficult to bring in a development on time and to budget. I don't think think I've ever met anyone who has done so. I've tried some small developing myself, and look, it's hard work, so you also have to have the time to do it. If you don't have the time to do it, it's going to take even longer again. Get a few more properties under your belt, maybe. Maybe think about granny flatting if that's appropriate for where your properties are. Maybe think about upgrading the properties that you've got if you want to add a little bit of value, but I'd leave the developing just for now. Well, thanks for tuning in. It is time for a break, but when we return, you will have another chance to get hold of a copy of my book, Investing in the Right Property Now. But you'll have to ask a question, and then you'll have to have it selected. Call us now on 1300 30 34 35. Tweet Margaret Lomas AU, or you can also email us on property@skynews.com.au. Welcome back to the show, and thanks for staying with us. I'm Margaret Lomas from Destiny, and joining me is Damian Collins from Momentum Wealth and Steve Waters from Right Property Group. Now, I'm sure you also have a question for us, so grab the phone and dial 1300 30 34 35. Tweet Margaret Lomas AU, or email us on property@skynews.com.au. Now, Neil from Avoca Beach has a good point to raise, and he says, just after your thoughts on the vendor having to supply a building and pest inspection to prospective buyers. This independent document would allow purchasers and the banks to see upfront any faults with the property. Steve, of course they've been doing it in Canberra for a year or two now.
Some time now, yeah.
What do you think of the idea?
Look, I think it's good, but it'd only be one piece of information that I'd rely upon. Essentially, I'm always going to order my own pest and building report, someone who I've employed. That way there's no possible way of perhaps a little bit of prejudice one way or the other. It's not a risk I'm willing to take, but I like the idea, I like the concept. In fact, some mortgagee in possessions also do the same thing, and they'll provide a pest and building report with the properties that they're selling. I think it just cuts down the time. It'll potentially cut down those that will or won't enter into the property or even consider purchasing it at the end of the day.
Really, I think it should be the responsibility of the seller to prove that they've got a property in good order, don't you?
Look, I think it's generally a good idea, particularly when you go to auctions and you see a lot of bidders, and 6 or 8 people will all spend the same amount of money on a building and pest inspection, and of course a lot of them, at least all bar one, are going to miss out on that property, and it's a lot of money down the drain for those potential buyers. So I think in those circumstances it makes sense. In Western Australia and Queensland, you can buy the property subject to getting the building inspection, so you don't need to get it before you put your offer in. You can quite easily, it's pretty standard.
You still have to get it done, pay for it and pull out. I mean, you know, you can sort of do that here as well. You can not exchange, but
the issue, I guess the issue of the reluctance around the circles from the seller's point of view, and a lot of the inspectors report will say my liability only extends to the person paying for it, which is the seller. If, let's say, they miss some termites, the buyer buys it and they go, they don't have a contract with that pest inspector, so that's where it gets a bit murky.
And maybe that will change under the...
That's it. I mean, we get hundreds of reports every month, and the difference between some of the providers of those pest and building reports is remarkable.
Yeah, chalk and cheese, aren't
like, there could be no termites, and then there is termites. And that's why I think I'd rather, as a purchaser, rely upon the person that I've engaged to do the reports for me. Now, having said that, the 1 or 2 times I have sold a property, I have got a pest and building report, purely because, not to provide any potential buyers, but I want to see what I'm offering up. Is there anything that's going to kill a sale for me?
You're not nice like that. You didn't do it because you just wanted to be nice to the purchaser?
No.
Can't help that, but yeah. Look, we think it's a great idea. I think it's a great idea. I think it should be done. I think, you know, in Victoria, they have vendor disclosure statements where you have to disclose any faults with the property. Yet in New South Wales, for some reason, vendors think they don't have to tell the buyer anything, and the law almost supports that. I mean, surely if you bought something with a known fault, you'd have some other law you could get the seller through, but certainly not real estate law. So I think it's great to have that kind of disclosure up front. Troy, welcome to the program. How are you going?
Good, thank you. How's yourself tonight?
We're really well here, as you can see. We're ready to help you. What can we do for you?
I actually have an investment property up at Upper Coomera, but the negative gearing is starting to get to a situation now where the tax breaks aren't quite there. Like, we've owned it for 7 years. Also own a house in Casino, New South Wales, which is our primary residence. And I'm just wondering whether it's worth hanging on to the property at Upper Coomera and just, you know, pay the property off for the next few years and see what happens, or do we sell it? Because at the moment we can basically sell it for not making a lot of money, but we can make a very slight profit, cover the costs, and then put the equity into somewhere else that may be more, you know, that can make a bit more percentage-wise.
Okay. I always worry, Steve, when people say that they want to get rid of a property because they won't be able to negatively gear it anymore, which of course means it's going to go into a positively geared situation where they're making more income on it than they're actually getting. Really, you shouldn't be investing for the negative gearing benefits. No. Nothing's been said here by Troy about asking the question, you know, what about growth? And do we think Coomera is going to grow in the future? And that's really what you should be out to get.
At the end of the day, that's what you want, the growth. But at the same time, trying to run your portfolio or trying to invest around tax breaks is just not sustainable in any way, shape or form. I would be looking at the growth potential of the area and whether it's going to help me or not. Having said that, and you ask a very good question, if there is no growth prospect there and for whatever reason the property is starting to burn a hole in your pocket excessively, should you just cut your loss and run and perhaps move any equity that you do have into a better performing investment? That's something that you really need to run the figures and the numbers time and time again before you make that decision.
That's a different story. I'm assuming this isn't burning a hole in his pocket at all. I'm assuming his negative gearing tax breaks are coming to an end. It means that he's going into a positive cash flow situation on it, and so it's actually giving him money.
I agree, Troy. The amount of people who come to me and say that, similar to what you say, oh, I'm not going to be negatively geared anymore, should I sell it? Or it seems to be a problem. Well, you know,
they're talking to their accountants. That's why accountants are all about the tax break.
But yeah, actually, end of the day though, I want all my properties to be positively geared because that means I'm actually making money. Negative gearing might help you depending on your tax bracket, anywhere from 30 cents in the dollar maybe to 50 cents in the dollar. And at the end of the day, you're still paying some of that out of your own pocket. Obviously, depreciation is a non-tax deduction, so a non-cash deduction, I should say. So look, don't be afraid of positive gearing in its own right, because that's good. That's ultimately what we want all our properties to be, positively geared. Yes, they might start off negative depending on interest rates and the rental yield and growth prospects. But yeah, the second question obviously is Upper Coomera. Look, I think you obviously need to have a good look at that. It hasn't done particularly well for you, but there's a lot. We couldn't just give you a straight answer because we need to, obviously you need to see a property investment professional, maybe your accountant to help you as well, calculate all the potential capital gains, costs in and out. And if you're going to lose too much, maybe it doesn't make sense to sell and rebuy.
Here's the thing, Troy. If your property is headed into positive cash flow territory, what it means is this. You have money every week left over after you pay everything off. And what you do with that money is you pay it into the loan if you don't have a loan of your own, or put it into offset. And what that does is it buys equity even in a slow market. And equity is what allows you to leverage again into another property. So you want more equity so that you can then use that as a deposit for the next property. A positively geared property is great because what it means is that in those years where the property doesn't grow, you still get equity because you're getting that positive cash flow to buy that equity. Now, having said all of that, if you had a positively geared property that was in a really lousy area that never grew, you may think about selling it because positive cash flow alone is not enough for a property. But if you're in an area that has the potential to grow as well as get that positive cash flow, it's a nice mix. Now, I've never been a fan of the Gold Coast and I'm still not. However, when I do talk about suburbs of the Gold Coast, Upper Coomera is one of the ones that I do like. It's right up close to the border of Brisbane, up near Beenleigh there, and that area is really strong and I see it waving out to Upper Coomera. The only reason Upper Coomera hasn't moved recently, because it is full of families and infrastructure, is because when all those new developments there were sold, they were sold at well over their intrinsic market value. That area's been playing catch up and I think it's going to move again in the not too far distant future. It's time for a few more messages, but when we return, you'll have another chance to get your questions answered simply by calling us on 1300 30 34 35, tweeting Margaret Lomas AU, or emailing us on property@skynews.com.au. Great great to see that you're still here for Your Money, Your Call tonight, where Damian Collins from Momentum Wealth and Steve Waters from Right Property Group are helping me to take your questions. Now, you can still get yours into us tonight, and you may even be this week's book winner. Call us now on 1300 30 34 35, tweet Margaret Lomas AU, or email us on property@skynews.com.au. Tony from Melbourne, how you going, Tony?
Good, thanks. I love the show, Margaret. It's terrific.
Thank you.
Margaret, the question is, I've got a property in East St Kilda in a block of 7.
Right.
It's about 40 to 50 years of age. And what I'm wondering is all this new property coming onto the market in all the new stuff, is that going to affect the capital growth of that older property going forward? And if I can quickly sneak in another question, that is there buying opportunities in these mining towns like Mackay, Karratha? Yeah, that was the other second question.
Okay,
Thanks.
I'm going to give you the unit question, or do you want the mining question?
I'm happy to do either. But
Okay.
Tony, I'll start with the unit one. Look, yes, there's no market. A market of older units can't operate in a bubble outside the impact of newer units. So if there's a lot of newer units, people are sport for choice. If they come back a little bit in newer units, which they're likely to, it's going to have some impact. Now, what you might find, a block of 7, East St Kilda, you might find that if it's on a big enough land parcel, maybe the highest and best use of your site might be a development site. So you might be lucky, and developers might come along and try and tie up the value.
Or
of that
Damien,
site.
you know what Melbourne people are like. They love quirky. They love that old stuff down there.
bit of retro.
So if it is one of those nice Art Deco buildings,
absolutely, yeah.
that could be a different
absolutely.
story.
If it's got some particular character value, it's hard to know. Some of them are, I know St Kilda fairly well. Just the old 60-style block of flats that are pretty ugly, and you've got some beautiful Art Deco ones. So all those things come into the mix, but as a general rule, they will suffer a little bit, but I don't think they'll suffer certainly as much as the newer units.
Mining.
Look, essentially, well, the question was, will there be some sweet little deals around the mining towns at the moment? Look, possibly, but just because it's cheap doesn't mean it's a good deal. I'd be sort of holding on to my money, looking in other areas. I don't think there's any, perhaps, value there. There's certainly a lot of risk involved. I don't see commodity prices really doing anything spectacular in the near future. I'd be kind of holding back. And to be honest with you, it's not the kind of property or investment area that I'd want to be in.
Look, I've got to be honest with you, Tony. The mining towns will eventually come back. I don't think when they do come back they're going to go anywhere near where they went. Moranbah is an example. People were buying shacks up there for $750,000 and $800,000. They were getting $1,500 to $2,000 a week, and they can't sell them today for $100,000. Now they may come back. They'll never go back up there again because everybody's gotten smarter. The mining companies are building their own accommodation. The governments are releasing land to take the heat out of those markets. That's what they did, and it all worked. And then, of course, commodities all fell in value, and mining started to shut down a little. Not that it shut down completely. Now, what's going to happen is the actual operations phase of many mines is due to recommence in 2018 to 2020, and we will start to see a bit of interesting property there. But to be honest, it's a bit of a wait for that to happen. You're looking at 4 years. You're going to struggle with the tenant. Vacancies are up to 20 and 30% in a lot of those areas. And before that operation phase begins again, I can tell you those mining companies are going to be ready with accommodation for their workers, and the local houses aren't going to be rented. So I really don't think there's any opportunity in mining towns. They're just too risky. If you're a risk taker and a gambler and you've got money to lose, we could be wrong. Give it a go, but I don't think we are. Joe from Sydney, welcome to the program, Joe.
Oh, good evening, Margaret and panel. Thanks for taking the call.
You're more than welcome.
Now, look, I'm after a little bit of, picking your brains about 3 areas that I'm looking at investing. I'm liking the look of sort of the Frankston Seaford area in Victoria, and also the sort of Munda, Virginia, Chermside, Geelong area in Brisbane. But I'm also considering sort of Kippering, Redcliffe, that sort of area as well. Now, for someone who was looking at medium-term growth, so let's say the time frame 3 to 5 years, which of those areas would you pick and why? And if none of them, where else should I be looking?
Okay. I'm going to give you a short time each to have a go. Steve.
Look, if I had to have a pick, it'd be Brisbane. However, I'd be just pulling back from that inner city ring, if possible. Preferably, if I wanted that 3 to 5 year time frame where I'm going to make a little bit of money with growth and cash flow as a combination, I'd probably be in that 20-minute ring outside of Brisbane. I think there's going to be an oversupply in the areas that you mentioned.
Okay, so you like Nunda and Chermside, which is, of course, really in that more 5 to 10 kilometre ring there?
Chermside, yeah, Chermside's one of the, about 10 kilometres out. It's one of the strategic areas of Brisbane identified. So you expect to see a lot more government investment in the area. Look, I don't think, again, Brisbane or any of the cities are going to, run away in the next 3 to 5 years. But I think you'll do better in Brisbane. Although the area you've picked in Melbourne, I do like. Frankston Seaford's a good spot if you're going to go to Melbourne. But I'd be sticking with Brisbane, and Chermside would be my pick.
You know, it's funny, if you watch this show from when we first began, which we worked out tonight is almost 9 years ago to the day. With the very first show, if you go back, I think we can find it on my website somewhere, you'll see that the very first area that I ever recommended anyone invest in was actually Frankston. And that was on my first show here, and it's done very well in that time, and it's still poised to do better again. My money's on Kippering, Redcliffe area though, not so much Redcliffe because that's already gone, up into Deception Bay, back into Rothwell, even Mango Hill, which is a little bit more expensive, but right there on that freeway, because that whole northern suburbs area is burgeoning and it just hasn't quite taken off yet, but properties are really well priced in the very early 3s and even late 2s. You'll get something up there, you'll get a 6% rental return, and the 3 to 5 year period is exactly right for that area, because no one in Brisbane's realised it yet, but with that new rail line into Rothwell and all sorts of other infrastructure happening, all of a sudden everyone who's watching this show today and don't do anything in 5 years' time will go, oh yeah, Margaret said that 5 years ago. So maybe get in now on it, and I think you'll do pretty well. Now we have an email from Daniel who asks, I'm 28 and I live in northwest Sydney. We're building our place of residence in Kellyville and I have 5 investment properties. Well done at 28. Go boy. We will have a lot of equity to use once the build is complete. Would you recommend to start putting a few granny flats on my investment properties in Western Sydney, or use that money to invest in other properties? Wow, this is a tricky one, Steve, because look, I like granny flats as well as the next person, but I believe the whole granny flat build also needs good market timing, and I'm just questioning whether it's the time.
I agree. I think you've missed the boat with the granny flats in that western corridor throughout Sydney, and the other problem I have is the amount of granny flats that's been built throughout that whole sector. On top of the fact that a lot of those granny flats actually look like shipping containers.
Yeah, they do. I thought you were going to say something else then when you started the SH word.
Shipping containers.
Worried I was going to have to... I've got my little button under the desk, the little mute button.
And I also think that the time's been and gone for that. There's perhaps an argument to suggest also that the tenant quality for the granny flats is a little to be desired, and therefore that the actual net rent back to you is actually not as fantastic as it seems to be, because you need that tenant mix between the main house and the granny flat, because you'll have people moving out from one or the other, plus the first week's rent that the agent will take, so the net rent back to you is not that good. In terms of taking the equity out of the principal place of residence, if that's what you deem where your portfolio and your life is up to, I'd be looking perhaps more to get into the next area, which is perhaps a different state, and buying properties that perhaps have the potential to put the granny flat in the next 2 to 3 years, rather than doing so now.
You know, Damien, I've seen granny flat developments that have been really good ones, where the house really lent itself to them. It had a big backyard. They were able to make it look like an actual subdivision with a battle axe block almost behind. I've seen that really well done. And under those circumstances, private driveway, it's like 2 houses. But I've also seen it badly done where it's like a box stuck in the backyard where someone has to go down the side passage to get to it. They don't have parking, and it's really creating almost like a social housing problem in some of those areas.
I think that's going to be a massive problem of the future, and if we go back to that western corridor where a lot of that is, you can literally reach out and touch the granny flat next to you. I think there's going to be problems in years to come. On the other side of the coin, a well-built granny flat I think will add the value, it'll add the cash flow. As an example, we just did one up in Brisbane where we put a 2-bedroom granny flat on for $115,000, separate entrance, plenty of wide access, fenced off. It's almost... like it's a proper subdivision.
Or if you can get one that's on maybe, 2 street frontages, or a corner block, and put one in behind a corner block, that's a different story, isn't it?
It is, and Daniel, look, a lot of granny flats, as the panel's mentioned, in a lot of cases they end up being not really adding much value. Particularly, some can, but our experience with it, and valuers particularly, is that they don't tend to value them at much more in the vast majority of cases than what you've actually spent on the property. So what you're looking at there is two different strategies. You're either looking at granny flats for cash flow, or you're looking at maybe investing in other properties for you'll get more capital growth. So hard to answer that question, but yeah, just be very careful. There's a bit of an oversupply in granny flats in a lot of areas now.
Okay, now I believe we have another caller on the line, and this is Michael from Sydney. Hi, Michael.
Hi guys, hey, I've got an apartment, two-bedroom apartment in Bowen Hills. I've had it for a couple of years. It's an older one, sort of built early 90s. It's got a bit of size about it. Sort of in a block of 7. Question I've got is there's so much supply going in around that Newstead region. Thing yields me about 6% now. Look, I'm originally a Melbourne guy, and I've sort of lived in Brisbane for a couple of years, but don't live there anymore. And I've sort of got a theory that just around the rental market up there, that once these apartments all come on, I'm just not sure how many people can actually afford, a price tag sort of in the $500 to $600 a week, just with the amount of government work up there. So, yeah, just I guess interested in your views. Do you think maybe to hold, or maybe time to tip it and move on? Thanks.
Look, it's a good point, and I agree. I think it's like Brisbane's creeping up with a very secret oversupply that no one's really picking at the moment. But we've had a lot of things happen, back to the floods and the GFC, then a lot of projects were put on hold. Yeah. And all of a sudden they all came back together. And so we are seeing this oversupply creep up on them, and I think Michael's right.
I think you are right, Michael. There's a lot of supply of apartments coming into the near 5K ring around Brisbane, and look, whether or not to sell is always a difficult one, because we don't know your entry price. I've looked at examples with clients, and sometimes they can lose 25%. By the time they sell, the sales cost, the stamp duty to rebuy, and also the capital gains, it could suck up 25%. So of the value of what you got. So there's a lot more to think about it, but you want to be cautious. I think in a year or two's time, you're going to find you're getting less rent, and your capital growth outlook's going to be pretty soft for a while there.
So, Steve, I guess the question that Michael needs to ask himself is, how low can I go in rent to still cover my costs, and so it doesn't cost me a lot of money to hold? Because oversupply does work its way out. It sometimes can take 2 years, it sometimes can take 5 years. In Melbourne, it's probably going to take a good 10 because there's so much of it. There's not as much in Brisbane, but there will be some. So can he continue to hold through that? Because I don't think the values will be hugely impacted. I think they'll be a little bit impacted, but not that much.
Yeah, I don't think the values will be too much impacted. I think the cash flow, as you mentioned, will be. He's actually very lucky. He's got a small complex, a rather large unit compared to what's coming onto the market, and that's going to be an attraction to a certain type of renter. I think, as you mentioned, getting the debt position right, getting the cash flow right, perhaps even locking in interest rates, just to take care of the cash flow to ride out this perhaps oversupply situation, which is going to happen. But as you say, it's not going to last forever, and as quick as things turn into an oversupply, they turn into an undersupply just as quickly, and being able to capitalise perhaps on the next upturn of the cycle is something to consider.
Yeah, look, Michael, I never like to see people coming out of properties unless they absolutely have to for financial reasons. So I'm the first one to advise someone to disinvest if their present financial circumstances are taking a big hit, and or if the property isn't showing any signs of really doing something for them in the coming 3 to 5 years. You can go without food for probably a year, or just eat, the bare minimum of food for about a year, but once you get past that, it gets a little bit old hat, and it's not so much fun anymore while you're waiting for your property to grow. So I will definitely advise people to disinvest if I think the time has come. But I don't think you put up a good enough case for disinvestment in your case unless you are struggling financially in it. So I do advise you to go away and have a look at your cash flows, have a look at how low your rent can go, so that you can still hang on to that property. If you're starting to have to put in a good amount of money, like $100 a week, then all you're doing then is losing the money slowly rather than quickly up front in selling costs and capital gains tax. So it really becomes a financial proposal, I guess, because I don't think you're going to be impacted too negatively in those values, and I think down the track you're going to come out of it, and it's not going to be too far down the track. So have a good long think and do some numbers. Well, thanks for tuning in. It is time for our last break, but when we return we'll answer the last few questions and also some more email. If you've got one, call us now, 1330 3435, Don't forget you can tweet me, Margaret Lomas AU. You can email us also on property@skynews.com.au. Welcome back to Your Money, Your Call. I'm Margaret Lomas, and it's been my pleasure tonight to host Damian Collins from Momentum Wealth and Steve Waters from Right Property Group. Our lines are closed for tonight, but we do have time for these last questions. First of all, Brad from the Gold Coast. How are you going, Brad?
Yeah, good, thanks, Margaret. Thanks for taking my call.
It's my pleasure.
I just had a couple of questions. I just wanted to add to my portfolio of properties in Queensland and Western Australia. And I've identified Playford in South Australia. And I was just wondering if you agree, and if so, what suburbs in that area might be the better ones to go for.
Okay.
And a second question, just regarding the granny flats. When you have a granny flat, do you pay double the rates?
Ah, good question. Okay, you can answer the rates question first, Steve.
Look, potentially yes is the short answer. If you subdivide the property, well then you are going to be up for two rates if you have the two different titles. Look, granny flats are a great way to add cash flow, but they've got to be on the right block, as we were discussing a little earlier on, with enough site access, a good cost to operate, and have the potential tenant there, of course. Now, the second question was, what do we think of Playford down in South Australia?
Elizabeth, Davern Park, all of those areas are part of Playford Shire?
Yeah, I don't mind it, to be honest with you. In fact, I think it was only a couple of months ago you and I were talking about Adelaide and how it's going to be the dark horse, and it's now starting to prove that very much so.
Yeah, doing pretty well. Thank God for that, because I've got a lot of property down there. I took a bit of a stab in the dark there, and I'm developing some of them. What do you think of Playford Shire?
Look, I guess the South Australia, unlike my two panellists, it's a nice place to visit and go to the Barossa Valley, but...
you go through Playford Shire when you go to the Barossa Valley, as it turns out.
Well, I'll stop there on the way next time I go through, but I'm struggling to see, look, Adelaide prices, certainly, they're cheap, there's no doubt about it. When you compare it to what you pay in Sydney, Melbourne, it's just incredibly cheap, but... what is the catalyst for property prices to increase significantly? Now, look, obviously the auto industry we know is on the downturn. Population growth is not strong. So it's not, as I say, a beautiful city, but until they get some population growth and strong economy there, I can't see it. As I say, it might do reasonably well in the next couple of years just because it is cheap and the other cities have run ahead, but I'm looking at a 10-year time frame and I just don't see what's going to drive it to outperform over a 10-year period.
Well, let me tell you what happens in Adelaide. It grows every year. It doesn't grow by a lot, but it grows every year, like 3.5. For me, Adelaide is where you invest if you don't want to take too big a risk, because you'll always get growth, but you do have to pick and choose. And at the moment, I would be more inclined to be going south rather than north, because I don't think the Holden closure up in the Playford Shire will have a long-term impact, but everybody else does. So at the moment, we've got a bit of a problem with people not wanting to buy there. Once the Holden plant's closed and everybody's moved on and realised that it's a drop in the ocean and it's no big impact, then people will come back and then some into the Playford Shire. Meanwhile, the Onkaparinga Shire is going great guns, and we're seeing far better than average growth down in that area for a couple of reasons. There's not a lot of new land now. It is beachside, and people have that sentimental connection to the beach. You can live 2 or 3 streets back from the beach for $300,000 or less down there, and they're now building some great schools. They've got the big bus depot down there as well at the Onkaparinga Shire, and the train line down to Seaford. So there's a lot to be said for that area. Just on those rates, you won't pay double rates, but what you will have to pay with the granny flat is an extra cost for more bins and for those extra services. So it's not extra rateable land, but it is an extra cost with every time you need another bin and another recycling bin and you need those collected, then that does add to your costs when you do build those granny flats. We do have a tweet from Luke, and Luke asks, Perth houses saw an increase last quarter. Is the tide turning? Finally. Do you remember how many years ago when I came over to the Perth Expo and everyone's talking Perth up and I was the only one who was saying no, no, and everyone hated me because obviously Perth people just don't like you saying, and I wasn't saying bad things, I just wasn't saying good things. And of course it didn't really do much since then.
Look, it's been an interesting market. Some areas and some properties, even in the overall market, hasn't done particularly well, have performed quite strongly. Forestfield has done well. We bought a lot of properties there for clients. Also, the Belmont-Cudale region come back a bit the last 12 months, but some of those properties we bought for $450 ran up to $800. Now have come back again into the sort of mid-6s towards $700. So, look, overall, the market has still probably got 12 months of softer conditions. No one can say if it's going to go up or down. I saw one forecast today, so it might go down a few percent. Look, I don't certainly see it running away this year. Will it drop a few percent? Who knows? But if you're looking at Perth at the long term, the mining cycle goes ups and downs, but certainly long term still got good population growth. They still need our resources in Asia. That's not going away. Agriculture's there. So your long term 10-year horizon's good. Next 12 months is not fabulous, but it's a good opportunity to buy something you can lock away for your 10-year portfolio.
And let's face it, there's some parts of Perth where you get some good cash flow for your money, and the properties are pretty good. And where else but Perth can you buy a house that's got a living room, a dining room, a lounge room, a games room, an outdoor alfresco area, a cinema room, and 75 living rooms, and 15 bedrooms, and a bathroom for every bedroom, and it's just your normal everyday suburban house.
There's a few McMansions around, I've got to say.
There's a lot of them there, and you know, if you live there, you have to keep up with everyone else, and you've got to have one as well. You can't have anything but. So, yeah, it's a great place to live as well. Love Perth, and in fact, 3 of my children were born there, so don't send me letters about... yeah, don't send me any letters. OK, look, before we finish up for tonight, just as a final word on those things that don't add value to your property, we talked about the fact that you shouldn't be reducing your living areas, but, you know, people go and do a lot of really silly things, I've noticed. Like, you know, they'll build man caves, or, you know, they'll add things into their houses, like special things in the kitchens, spend extra money on better fixtures and fittings, and as you say, you need good quality, but you don't need to really go over the top. If you're trying to add value to a property, you've got to keep it simple, haven't you?
It has to be simple, and furthermore, any of the tradesmen that you use, if you are going to do a renovation, and just as a side note, make sure they're licensed and insured. The amount of bad quality workmanship that we see on a day in, day out basis is just unbelievable, and often a bad renovation, if you're taking over, it'll actually cost you more than actually starting from scratch.
Well, that's certainly some good advice to finish on for tonight, because that's all we have time for this week. And next week, I'm afraid that I'm off again just for the night, dealing with a couple of health issues. Hopefully my recovery won't be too long, and I'm hoping to be back again on 22nd of February. Next week, Michael will take the reins again for me, and he'll be joined by Brad Beer and Ian Rodriguez. So get those tax and depreciation questions ready to go, and I'll forward them on to Michael. Thanks to Damian and Steve for helping me tonight. They've both done a great job, and they'll be back again on a future show. Now, thanks to all of our callers. We've had a great night and some excellent questions, I have to say. This week, our question of the week goes to Ang. Now, Ang, you weren't sure where you should spend your $750,000 in Melbourne, and we gave you some advice contrary to when you were where you were looking. If you can now email me to yourmoneyyourcall@destiny.com.au. Now, that may well come up on your screen in a moment, but yes, there it is, yourmoneyyourcall@destiny.com.au. Then I can send you your book. Now, if you don't know what my company Destiny does, well, the answer is everything that you need as a property investor. Education, mentoring, support, and finance as well. We're certainly experts in that area. And this month, if you book a consultation online at destiny.com.au and mention Your Money, Your Call, you'll get a copy of one of my books. Meanwhile, you can follow me on Twitter, Margaret Lomas AU, and on Instagram, Margaret Lomas Property. And if you're not already a Destiny VIP, then you're missing out on lots of things, including my regular newsletter. So go to my website, destiny.com.au, and sign up now because it's free. Thanks for being with us tonight, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.
The information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.